I was scrolling through my favorite Wikipedia articles when I realized a lot of these, not many people know about. Everyone knows the US has a questionable past with things, even if you are super patriotic. I could talk about the FBI and CIA allegedly having involvement in Twitter suppressing information. I could talk about, the Edward Snowden thing, or the Whiskey Rebellion, MKUltra, COINTELPRO, how they treated the indigenous, or anything else that is popping up behind me. But I'm going to tell you a tale close to my heart.
61, Bay of Pigs. What happened?
We all got killed.
We have evidence, first-hand account, and a country that knows about what actually happened at the Pig Bay. But in American education, it's more or less taught like,
we pull up, they say no, we leave.
That's not what happened at all. The US fumbled this more than a hooker. Like the rugby position, what did you think I meant? Let's start with why you may know this story. Call of Duty Black Ops. The 2010 one, the good one. Operation 40 is the mission in question, and it's arguably the second best starting mission in Call of Duty history, right after Call of Duty 2. But is it accurate? Kinda. There is some important little bits in this mission.
Castro's paranoid. No reason. Tried to get him for 3 years.
Yes, the US tried to assassinate Castro 638 times. That we know of. That's mental. Which, if you need to know who asked for how many, here you go. Mostly, it's hogwash as far as I'm concerned. It's a Call of Duty mission, nothing more. But look at these numbers. How the hell did 1,200 of 1,500 get captured? Killed, sure, but captured? Call of Duty, please explain. They don't. So, let me bastardize this entire ordeal. Respectfully, of course. Actually, I don't have to do much of anything. The CIA did most of the legwork. Thanks, Agent Dulles. I'm not going to explain how we got to the invasion. I might make a separate video on it at some point, but for this one, pause here and go to the Wikipedia article if you just need your information. All you need to know is that the US tried to assassinate Castro a bunch of times. I don't know how many at this point, so let's say the nice number. The US sanctioned Cuba because of some good old McCarthyism, and Cuban rebels were a thing, and the US wanted to exploit that. It all starts in 1960, when the CIA decided that Castro wasn't someone they wanted kicking back on the beautiful beaches of Cuba, and started thinking of ways to overthrow him. Some of the higher-ups were members of the CIA that helped overthrow Guatemala, so Cuba knew it was in good hands. They approved $13 million at the time to, quote, bring about the replacement of the Castro regime with one more devoted to the true interests of the Cuban people and more acceptable to the US in such a manner to avoid any appearance of US intervention. The CIA higher-up also told Eisenhower and Kennedy at the time that they were confident that they could take the island. They started preparing ships, planes, men, and even guerrillas. Also, the US knew that Cuba, and because of it being the Cold War, the Soviets knew the date of the attack, and they still went along with it. A few bombings were done on airfields, and Cuba complains to the UN about, all of it. The late night of the 16th of April, a mock landing was done by the US on the upper tip of Cuba. This is just a bunch of speakers making boat sounds. Meanwhile, about midnight of the 17th, the CIA is pulling into the Bay of Pigs slowly as they get stuck on coral reefs that they thought was seaweed. They also discovered that one of the landing points, Playa Larga, was lit with floodlights, so they had to find somewhere else to park. At 3 a.m., Castro was woken up to be informed about the invasion. He orders airstrikes. This was possible because as the CIA landed, a jeep of Cuban militia comes by. At about 7, one of the ships gets damaged by an airstrike. 270 troops were dropped off. 180 were similarly dropped off. At 7:30, the US drops 177 paratroopers, about 30 of which got their equipment stuck in a swamp and they could not get the roads blocked off. Other groups of paratroopers could get the roads blocked, but couldn't do much because they found themselves surrounded. That night, American ships turned away as it was time for bed and they were really sleepy. But in the morning, they returned with ammunition and other supplies, except 2 ships, who just kept going. Later that morning, as Luffy and the gang went off to find the One Piece, Cuba started to advance. At 10:30 a.m., the Cuban militia gained Playa Larga. By then, Castro and another important guy you wouldn't recognize the name of were around the battlefront. At 2 p.m., President Kennedy calls Nikita Khrushchev of Soviet fame, probably not able to reach Castro to do some rather hands-on leading on his part. Khrushchev basically told the US that if they really wanted to land in Cuba, they needed to do it all at once because the US really wouldn't be around in that case. This was not going very well at all. The next day, a little after lunchtime, CIA forces were ordering retreats into Giron. 2 destroyers moved into the bay to evacuate retreating soldiers. This was not successful because the Cubans watched fury like one time. That's to say, Cuban tanks forced 2 destroyers out of the bay. And I cannot understate how impressive I find that. I know nothing about anything, but that's impressive. The next day, about 30 men were rescued by 2 destroyers, a submarine, and a goddamn flying boat. A little over 1,200 members of the brigade were captured, probably due to a lack of ammunition and supplies. In 1962, most of these men were put on trial for treason in Cuba. This means they were sentenced to 30 years, which was narrowly avoiding the death penalty. In 2021, it was found that Brazil's government at the time kinda asked Cuba to, not kill them all. In April, Kennedy asked military and CIA directors to form the Cuba Study Group to learn from the Looney Tunes ass invasion attempt. The report said that the defeat was because no one thought the plane through in the fucking slightest. From the impossibility of success doing it stealth-like, not enough planes, not enough people, weapons, bombings, and the loss of a few gum fruit as well as ammunition. The CIA's own report, declassified in '98, said, and I quote, "Number 1. The CIA exceeded its capabilities in developing the project from guerrilla support to avert armed action without any plausible deniability. 2. Failure to realistically assess risks and to adequately communicate information and decisions internally and with other government principles. 3. Insufficient involvement of leaders of the exiles. 4. Failure to sufficiently organize internal resistance in Cuba. 5. Failure to competently collect and analyze intelligence about Cuban forces. 6. Poor internal management of communications and staff. 7. Insufficient employment of high-quality staff. 8. Insufficient Spanish speakers, training facilities, and material resources. And 9. Lack of stable policies and or contingency plans. All in all, a fairly standard CIA operation. In Cuba, of course, they thought the US couldn't be trusted, which, fair, but this ultimately led nowhere. It's not like the closest that we have come as a world to annihilation of the nuclear variety might be because of the CIA thinking 1,500 people was a suitable invasion force. There isn't a possibility of that. You know that meme where it's like, the US never lost a war and then shows Vietnam? Well, we can add Cuba to that list, I think. And Laos, and the USSR, and Cambodia, and Syria/Lebanon, and Somalia. Shit, even the Lakota. And the Taliban like 4 times. So yeah, that's all I know.